Hi, I'm Olivia, dietitian here at the MLK Health Center and Pharmacy. In this video, I will be discussing low-carb diets. Just a reminder, talk to your doctor before starting any new eating plan. Low-carb is a term thrown around a lot, and it can be confusing as to what exactly that means. In its simplest explanation, low carb means eating a reduced amount of carbohydrate containing foods at your meals, and so therefore you're going to have a larger portion of your proteins, fats, and non-starchy vegetables. Carbohydrate foods are those foods that when our body digests them, our body turns them into sugar or glucose after digesting them, and this is what causes our blood sugar to rise. These foods are going to be your grains, your starchy vegetables, fruits, milks, sweets, sugar-sweetened beverages, and some alcohols. So these are the foods that are going to be carbohydrates. Your non-carbohydrate foods are your proteins, so meats, fish, shellfish, poultry, eggs, those are your proteins. And then fats are foods like butters, oils. Those do not contain carbohydrates, and so are not going to raise your blood sugar. Non-starchy vegetables, so those are things like broccoli, cauliflower, any leafy greens, tomatoes, squash, peppers, things like that. Those vegetables have very few carbohydrates in them, so they are considered a low-carb food. Nuts and seeds are also low-carb, but they do have some carbohydrates in them, so when eaten in small portions, about a small handful, it's about a quarter cup, that is considered a low-carb food. I know it can be intimidating when you hear low carb and you see the list of all the foods that contain carbohydrates and you start to think, what can I eat? What is safe to eat? What's not? So I just want to start by saying that this is low carb. It's not no carb. It's still fine to have carbohydrates in your diet. And we're going to talk about which carbohydrates are the better options to eat and then how much to have. First, the carbohydrates that are going to be safe for you to eat are those that are whole grains, your starchy vegetables, so that's your corn, potatoes, beans, and peas. Those are starchy vegetables, fruit, and milk. And so milk would be like the milk you drink, and then yogurt, unsweetened yogurt. Those would be fine. The carbohydrates we want to limit or cut out completely are going to be your sugary carbohydrates, so your treats, desserts, sugar-sweetened beverages, so sodas, juices, sweet tea, punch, lemonade, things like that, and also alcohol. Now, let's talk about serving sizes. So the plate method is a great resource when just starting out with low carb. You imagine you have your dinner plate in front of you and there's a line down half of it. Half of our plate we want to make non-starchy vegetables. So remember, these are going to be low carb vegetables. The other half of your plate you would divide in half again, and a quarter of your plate is going to be your protein, whether that's chicken, beef, pork, fish, eggs, whatever you like. And then that last quarter section of your plate, that's going to be your carbohydrate serving. So whether you have a starch or a fruit, a serving of milk, that would be your carbohydrate serving at that meal. And you don't have to have a carbohydrate serving at each meal because, like I said, those non-starchy vegetables do contain some carbohydrates. So if you choose not to have an actual carb food at your meal, that's fine too. But some people prefer to still have some carbohydrate at their meals, and that's okay. And that's still going to be considered low carb if the portion is small. Things to drink during a low carb diet. Ideally, you would just be drinking water that doesn't have anything in it, and so it's not going to affect blood sugar or anything like that. It would be fine to have black coffee or unsweetened tea. If you do need a little splash of cream in your coffee, that would be fine, but that's just the regular cream, not a flavored creamer. Those can have sugar in them, and so that could be potentially lead the coffee to be a higher carb beverage. With low carb, it is preferred to avoid artificial sweeteners. If you do need a little sweetness, you can sweeten with a natural 0-calorie sweetener like stevia or monk fruit, but that would be something we'd want to just do occasionally. An example of what a day might look like eating low carb. So your first meal, breakfast, whenever you choose to eat that, maybe you have some scrambled eggs and some spinach or peppers. You can make an omelet. You can have cheese in that, avocado. Any of those healthy fats would be fine. If you wanted to have a little bit of carbohydrate with it, maybe you have a half a cup of berries with that meal, and then you would drink water or unsweetened tea or black coffee. Your lunch meal, an example might be a taco salad. So your salad part would be your lettuce, tomato. You could have taco meat on there. If you wanted to add cheese, sour cream, avocado, all of those are low carb, and so that would be fine. If you did want to add some carb to that meal, you could add a third a cup of rice. That could be your carb. Or if you chose to have beans instead, you could have about a half a cup of beans on that salad instead as your carb serving. If you wanted to have rice and beans, it would have to be a half a cup total of both of those mixed together, or you could do cauliflower rice instead of regular rice as a low carb option, so you can still have that half a cup of beans. We'd want to avoid tortilla chips. Those add up pretty quickly in carb amount, so those are something we'd want to avoid. And then you could add salsa on top as your dressing for that meal. For your supper meal, I have a couple different examples here. First, maybe you have a burger. This could be a beef patty or a turkey patty, whatever you prefer. A burger with all the fixins, and you would just omit the bun, or you could even use a lettuce wrap. I find that the larger leaves, like collard greens or mustard greens or something, work better as a wrap than just lettuce, because you can get like a larger wrap and it doesn't get quite as messy if you wanted to try that. And then you could also make carrot fries instead of potatoes, using regular potatoes or sweet potatoes for a little bit lower carb option. Another example for a supper meal is you can have just a piece of baked chicken with some non-starchy vegetables, whatever you like. If you wanted some carbs at that meal, you could have half a cup of roasted potatoes to get some carbs in that meal. Another example is you can have meatballs with some pasta sauce over spaghetti squash instead of regular noodles, or you could try some other type of veggie noodles for a low carb option at that meal. Some examples of snacks on a low carb diet would be, you could have a cheese stick or a meat stick and a quarter cup of nuts if you wanted that, or you can have an unsweetened yogurt cup would be a fine snack. There are some carbs in that, but you definitely want to look for ones that are not sweetened. Most yogurts that you find on the shelf are sweetened either with sugar or artificial sweeteners, so we would be looking for a plain yogurt. It would be fine to have a serving of fruit as a snack, but just know that that is a carbohydrate, and so just depending on how much carb you're eating at the rest of your meals, that might potentially bump you up a little bit, and that might not be considered low carb if you're having carbs at all your meals. But if your carbohydrate intake at your meals is low to none, then it would be fine to have a fruit as a snack. However many snacks you have is going to be up to you. If you don't want to have any snacks and just eat 3 meals, that's fine. If you need 1 or 2 snacks, that would be fine. Just make sure you're spacing them out so you're not eating too frequently. Some benefits of a low carb diet. First off is weight loss. Typically, when someone is starting a low carb diet, they can see weight loss pretty soon. Carbohydrates tend to hold a little water in our body, and so when we eliminate eating carbohydrates or reduce them greatly initially, we can see some weight loss that is usually from water, but ideally there would be a steady weight loss after that. Another benefit to eating low carb is that it helps to improve your insulin sensitivity. And what that means is that the insulin that you're making in your body, or the insulin you take, if you take insulin, will work more efficiently, meaning that you would require less of it. And this is a reason why it's very important for you to talk to your doctor if you were on any medicines that lower your blood sugar before starting this low carb diet. Another benefit with eating low carb is that it helps our bodies to be more efficient at burning fat. Part of that comes in because of the increased insulin sensitivity that does help our bodies become more efficient at burning fat. So again, that's another benefit of eating low carb. Some cons of eating low carb is, first off, it's just really different. Our American diet is basically centered around carbohydrates and sugary things. And so if that's how you're used to eating, switching to low carb can be very intimidating. It might be discouraging if you don't know what to eat, or even maybe I've mentioned some foods that you've never heard of before. You don't know what they look like. You don't know how to fix them, how to prepare them, and that's okay. Do you know that we are planning on making some cooking demonstrations in the near future that are some meals that would be low carb? So look for those on our YouTube channel in the future. But also just don't be afraid to try new foods and to look up recipes and how-to videos on the internet for how to fix some different vegetables if you're not sure what they are or how to prepare them. Another con of eating low carb is that if you were used to eating a high carb diet and you abruptly decrease your carbohydrate intake, you could have some side effects or symptoms. These might include fatigue, headache, irritability, and hunger. Just know that these symptoms would be short term. Our bodies do take a little bit of time. It might be a couple of days to adjust to you eating lower carb. So those are completely normal. Make sure you're drinking plenty of water, and that could help with some of those symptoms. If you find that the symptoms are just a little too difficult for you to manage, it is okay to add a little bit of carbohydrate back into your diet. Maybe you reduced it too quickly, and so you can just add a little bit back in until the symptoms are a little bit more manageable. And then after a little bit of time, see if you can back off on those carbs and see how your body does with it. Another potential con to eating low carb is that if you are very active, eating low carb might hinder your exercise performance. Something that could help with that is to be sure to have a snack before you exercise that does contain carbohydrates, and that carbohydrate would fuel your exercise. It doesn't have to be a lot, and you might have to experiment with this a little bit, but you could start with having just about 15 grams of carbohydrates. So that would be a piece of fruit, a yogurt cup, a half of a sandwich, and have that before your exercise to fuel that exercise, and see if that helps with any fatigue, or if you see that your exercise is not as intense as you're used to it because of the lack of energy you're experiencing from having a decreased amount of carbohydrate in your diet. And the last con I'm going to talk about for eating low carb is that if you are on any diabetes medication that does lower your blood sugar, it's very important for you to talk to your doctor before you start eating low carb. These medicines lower your blood sugar, and so if you were eating less carbohydrates, this could put you at risk for having low blood sugar, and that can be very dangerous. So it's very important to talk to your doctor before you start eating low carb if you're on any of these medications. We hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please like it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you.